Hi everyone, welcome to Everyday God with me, Jojo. Thank you so much for everyone who watched my intro episode and cheered me on for saying yes and obeying and stepping out in faithfulness. Thank you so much. That was so encouraging. So today's episode was actually meant to be someone else sharing their story, but as is the title of the podcast, I was having a conversation with God in my everyday, and He laid it on my heart to share a few stories about how I have met Him, encountered Him in my past leading up to now, before we can jump into other people's stories. So I don't know how many episodes we're going to do of this. We're just going to flow as led, be like the wind with it, and then we'll see how this goes. So this first story is, I titled it The One Where He Introduced Himself. I think it's the story of how I actually met God. And so I'll tell you the story, and then we see, what's in there for us, for both you and for me. So the story is set in the year 2011. I had just finished my Form 4. I'd done a year and a half of work. I was teaching as a peer teacher in a local high school in my neighborhood. That tells you I'd passed enough to be a teacher. And so I was waiting for the government-sponsored job, they call it, admissions in the university. So I'd gotten my admission letter. I was going to Kenyatta University to study economics and statistics, and it was going to be great. So I remember being so excited, and my dad was actually very excited because my dad was one who was keen to see his kids excel in academics. Like, he really wanted us to do the whole go to school, work hard, study, get good grades, get a good job, add whatever else is in there, get married, buy a house, buy a car, have children, and live a nice life. So he really tried to get us to go down that path. And so because I'd passed my exams, he was very pleased with me. And I'd learned to please him in that way. I'd learned that it's important to my dad that we do well in school. So I'd, keep my head down and study. I remember I didn't even do some of these things in high school, where people had boyfriends, because I was like, hey, I don't want to mess my future with boys. My dad will kill me. And so there was a mix of fear in it, but also knowing that I love my dad and I'm keen to do what he wants done. And so I was in my first semester. It was around May 2011. And it had been a good semester. I'd passed my CATs. I was doing so well. And then it was almost the last week to us closing school. And I remember very well, I was awake. It was a Sunday night going into a Monday, which was going to be our first exam. And I had studied for days, like I was ready. I was going to ace it. And as I'm studying, it was about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and I received a phone call. So my sister called me. And so when my sister called me, my first thought was they had gone out with my dad, because we used to go out for like family Sunday outings, even when we were kids, and we'd go with my dad and we'd just enjoy like good food, good fun, and then we'd go home. So I thought they had gone out for a family Sunday without me. So I picked up very excited to hear, why are you guys out so late without me? And on the other end of the line, was my sister, and she sounded so panicked, and she was like, yeah, dad has gotten into an accident. Do you have any money on you? We need to get an ambulance and we need to pay up front. So there was no hi, hello, how are you doing, anything. It was just straight into the thing. Now, we're gonna pause there. Pause. I'll take you back to some time back during the semester. Maybe it was sometime either between May and June. I'd gone home for the weekend, which I used to do because I could. School was so close to home. So I'd gone home for the weekend. It was a nice weekend, and I was going back to school Monday morning. And my mom would see me off. So she'd see me off to the stage. And my mom is very prayerful. Um, I've lived my entire life watching my mom exercise her faith and pray for her kids and hear God and all these things. I'd pray with her. I've gone to church seeking God with her just because I was too young. There was no way I could be left home, so we had to go together. But I had watched my mom pursue God. And so I knew for a fact she hears God. I'd seen multiple instances where she had heard God and it came to pass. And so we were walking to the stage. It was an early morning. I had a 7 a.m. class, so she was walking me to get a bus early. And once we got to the road, she, casually turned to me and said, so I have something to tell you. She told me two things, but I'll only share one. I actually just remembered the second one. It hasn't come to pass yet, but she told me two things. So she told me, one, God has told her to tell me that he will be my father. And at that time, it just sounded like a good, nice word for the week. God will be your father. And so I said, thank you so much, Mom. Bye. See you next weekend. But now this begins to make sense because in a month or so, this is when the phone call with my sister would happen. And so the phone call with my sister happened, and turns out my dad had had a car accident on his way home Sunday night, and they were trying to get him to Kenyatta Hospital. He needed to be in the ICU, and so they needed to find an ambulance, hence the phone call, because they had to pay upfront from Thika to Nairobi. So yeah, she called me and I sent her the money my dad had sent me for the week, and then I had to go to bed, but I was quite anxious. I didn't know what was going on, and they were not picking up my calls after. To cut the long story short, my dad passed on that Monday morning, and it would be a long week of getting nothing from my family because they wanted me to finish my exams, and then they would tell me, which I get how that sounded considerate, but perhaps there are other ways to go about it. But that is water under the bridge. So yeah, my dad passed on. So when my dad passed on, it was a big thing because I came to realize how much my identity was anchored on who my dad was and the role he played in my life. Like from things from being a provider downright to being my personal cheerleader. Like we had just talked about my exams, was I ready? Every time I did my CAT, he'd be the first person I call. A CAT is a continuous assessment test here in Kenya. Yeah, we were always constantly talking. We would, hang out. We'd go out for like a chocolate run. We've just gone to the supermarket to buy chocolate and eat it in the car together. Like we were just friends. And so when my dad passed on, it was a big deal. But I think it began a journey of me taking God on his word as my father, because that's when he introduced himself to me as my father. And it actually took a while for it to sink in, because the next couple of years were spent, one, being angry at God because why would he take away my father? And then me putting on my expectations on God for him to do everything my father used to do for me. And then getting to a place where I realized God was just trying to show me his fatherhood. So it took actually almost 8 years of walking with God until it dawned on me that all this time God had been trying to pursue me and to show me his love, but it did not mean that it would conform to what I think fatherhood looks like, just because I had an experience with an earthly father. And so, yeah, I think that brings me to a very pivotal moment where I encountered God. And from that day onwards, he was very present to show me that he's there. I'm here when your dad has passed on. I'm here. I'm not absent. When you need school fees now, I'm very present. When you need upkeep, I'm very present. He would be very present in the ways that I was provided for. Like, I became very aware that God was actually providing for me in ways that no one else is the one who has provided for me. Yeah, and so I think for me that has caused me to become aware that God does speak. He really does speak, um, because I have evidence of where he spoke and promised to fill a gap. And he does speak through people. And sometimes that looks like people who you know and you can attest to how well they know God. You've seen them walk their faith, you've seen them experience God, interact with God. And so you're sure when they tell you something, then for sure maybe God could be speaking. But secondly, just a place of testing the word. So my mom was given the message, she gave it to me. And I don't even think I would have been in the headspace to hear it. I don't think I would have, been in a place where God could have spoken to me directly. I wasn't that mature yet in the faith. But also, I don't think I would have recognized it was Him speaking to me. And so I think a lot of times when God is speaking to us, we're just not aware that it is God. And unfortunately, I feel like we're more aware of when Satan is at work. When something bad happens, you're like, whoa, Satan, I cancel you in the name of Jesus. I just feel like the enemy is working against me. But when something good is happening, I think we're like, oh, wow, my effort made that happen. Wow, my connections made that happen. It's never your first assumption to be like, wow, God is working on my behalf. We say it as I think God is working just in case He is, but I don't think we're thoroughly convinced that God is working. But also I became aware that God is present in the things that look bad, like death and grief and hurt and all those things, that there are also opportunities to meet God in that space. And so, yeah, that's how I actually came to begin my journey of journeying with God for myself, in a space where I wasn't leaning on my mother's faith anymore. I wasn't leaning on anyone else. I had to now come and meet this God who had sent a message for me, and He had said He will be my father. Yeah, so that's how He introduced Himself to me as God. See you next week. Bye.